ICE officials say the agency has released 12 of the 16 babies being held at a rural Texas detention center after complaints by immigrant advocates about dirty water, limited baby food, and a lack of medical care. The children, 9 of whom are under a year old, were being held in a detention facility in Dilley, Texas, more than an hour away from the nearest metropolitan center of San Antonio. The infants were the subject of a complaint filed by immigration advocates sent to Congress and the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General last week. Joining me now is CBS News digital reporter Kate Smith, who has been following this story. Kate, this is so disturbing to hear about. First, to whom were these 12 infants released, and what is happening with the 4 still in government custody now?
Like all asylum seekers, all of these mothers and the infants were released to family and friends who bought them bus tickets and plane tickets to go into their home. So what you might not know about asylum seekers is they always have a trusted family or friend member that they always go to. They're hardly ever just released into the public with no support.
And the U.S. government is already facing a lawsuit over this particular facility, which is run by the private prison operator Core Civic, after a 19-month-old died 6 days after leaving. I know you have been digging in on this and talking to doctors who visited the babies in the facility. What do they actually tell you about the conditions inside?
They were able to say that it wasn't sufficient for an infant. Infants require so much medical care. For example, after you give birth, it's a week checkup, a 2-week checkup, and a 4-week checkup, and that's the minimum of what's recommended. That's impossible to do at a detention center. So they were saying it's really completely insufficient for infants. It's barely sufficient for children. But just because infants require so much more care, it's really not appropriate for them to be there.
So then what is the government saying about the conditions inside this facility?
They're not saying anything. The DHS has failed to respond to us and our inquiries regarding this letter. They have said that they have provided all of the legally required medical care. And they did confirm, though, as of Friday, 17 infants under the age of 1 were in ICE custody. Again, 12 of those were released over the weekend, but that's all they were able to say about this situation.
Well, what is the purpose of holding children this young in government custody? Why can't they be immediately placed with family?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's one that nobody really has an answer to right now. I was able to speak to one immigration advocate who kind of speculated that these women are coming from the caravan that recently arrived in Eagle Pass, about 2,000 or so migrants, mostly from Central America, and her kind of speculation was that this is the government's way of signaling to migrants, if you come here via caravan, you will not be held to the same conditions that we've historically held immigrants to. It's going to be tougher for you. You're going to face absolute detention no matter what, and really trying to deter people from coming into the United States, seeking asylum, and especially doing so via caravan.
So legally speaking, though, what kind of care is the government required to provide for these children, and is the government meeting that standard?
That's a great question as well. And unfortunately, there isn't a clear answer to that. There was a Supreme Court case in the 90s that determined what you have to require for a minor, and that was appropriate medical care. But again, that's been legally interpreted to mean a host of different things. The way we view it now is typically 20 days maximum in a detention facility. But I was speaking to legal people on the ground who were at this place, and they were saying that some of these infants had been there for over 20 days, some as many 23 and 25 days.
All right, I know you continue to follow this story. CBS News digital reporter Kate Smith, thanks very much, Kate.